My name is Drake Evans, and I'm the Risk Control Manager for Senn Dunn Insurance in Greensboro. And this webinar is entitled Introduction to Defensive Driving, Safe Behaviors and Technique Behind the Wheel. Obviously, you won't be able to ask me questions, but as you can see at the bottom of the slide, my email is listed, devans@senndunn.com. My phone number is also listed there, area code 336-346-1385. Please feel free to send me an email or call me if you've got specific questions about this webinar or any other risk control or safety management program that Senn Dunn can help you with. Let's go ahead and get started. The objectives of our session today include to cover a few statistics about driving and specifically unsafe driving behaviors, also to identify behaviors that are factors in unsafe driving, to identify unsafe acts behind the wheel, to go over a few safety tips, and also to review defensive driving techniques. One thing I always stress in this course is that we're all drivers. I'm certainly not a driving expert by any means. And another question I get is about defensive driving. Well, really, what is it? It's defined as driving to save lives, time, and money in spite of the conditions around you and the actions of others. It includes the ability to recognize a hazard, understand the defense, and act correctly in time is key to defensive driving. Recognizing a potential hazard prepares you to do what's reasonable to avoid it, and once you've decided what to do, you must act correctly in time. As far as statistics go, thinking about the roads and how safe they are, some information, some data from 2006 included over 45,000 deaths on U.S. roads. That amounted to 6 deaths and 270 disabling injuries per hour. We know that the number of deaths and the number of deaths per mile jumps in June and peaks in August. Not a surprise, as many more people are on the roads during the summer. And Friday, especially the evening and night hours, had more fatal accidents than any other day. In North Carolina specifically, there's one traffic crash every 4.8 minutes. There's one injury or fatal crash every 15.8 minutes. And there's one commercial vehicle crash every 2.8 hours. One person's killed every 9 hours, and one person is injured every 10.3 minutes. And unfortunately and tragically, there's one unrestrained person is killed every 11.3 hours on North Carolina roads. Think about some of the costs of accidents, and specifically vehicle accidents, are obviously the physical damage to the vehicle, property damage that may be destroyed, and then certainly medical costs, yours, your passengers, other vehicles, other drivers, and then certainly the other liability costs to the other vehicles, the physical damage, neglect, that type of thing. And then finally, think about other injury costs, lost wages, lost work time. When you think about the crash, there are really 3 stages to any vehicle crash. First, obviously there's the vehicle crash, which is the physical crash. Next, there's the human crash, where your body hits the windshield, hits the door. And then finally, there's the internal crash. Those are your organs, your bones that are coming to a stop from the speed that you were traveling prior, whether that was 50, 60, 70, or 80 miles an hour. At some point, your internal organs and bones have got to come to a stop as well. A few unsafe driving acts include not using a seatbelt, driving under the influence, driving at an unsafe speed, failing to stop or yield, unsafe passing of another vehicle, tailgating, not using signals, smoking, drinking. We can add shaving, putting on makeup. I'm sure you've seen all these before. Even folks reading a map. Even today with GPS systems in the car, people still have maps, fold-out maps. I've certainly seen that. Reaching behind to discipline the kids, eating while driving, cell phones and texting. And we know in North Carolina just recently it was passed, I believe it was in the end of 2009, that texting while driving was banned for anyone. Other unsafe driving conditions, certainly as it gets darker, visibility becomes worse. That also becomes worse during rain, snow, dust. Poor road conditions certainly degrade as water, precipitation come onto the roads. And then also improper vehicle maintenance. The brakes, tires, just about anything, if it's not well maintained, is going to break down. And certainly there are other unsafe driving conditions include fatigue. Another thing that we don't commonly talk about but are unsecured equipment. For example, laptops, equipment, tools, a book bag, a handbag, just about anything can become a projectile in a crash. So something to think about there. We certainly know about driving under the influence, DUI. The National Safety Council says that 2 in every 5 Americans will be involved in an alcohol-related traffic accident at some time in their lives. There certainly has been some progress in this arena. The social stigma has been building against drinking and driving for many years. Over 17,000 people die in alcohol-related crashes in 2002. We know in North Carolina, as in most states, you're under the influence when your blood alcohol content reaches 0.08. Also, drowsy driving. 37% of drivers fall asleep at the wheel. This is more of a topic that we're talking about here in the recent past, has been drowsy and distracted driving. Certainly drinking and driving is still an epidemic, however. Distracted driving is a factor in nearly 30% of all crashes. 75% of drivers reported using their cell phones while driving. And think about the pressures that you might feel while you're driving, having to drive, maybe eat, maybe find a location that you're going to, maybe even take a call. But it's interesting to note that you make more than 200 decisions during every mile traveled. And those might be conscious or unconscious decisions as you've learned to drive, kind of that muscle memory that reminds you where the turn signal is, that up is right and down is left, or vice versa, whichever one of those. And it's really hard to think about, but once you get in the car, you know what's where, you know where the vehicle controls are. And I can tell you, if I would ask you just to remember one thing from this session, it's that safe driving has to be your primary responsibility, to get safely where you're going. Certainly sources of distracted driving include longer commutes, if you're unfamiliar with your route, if there's an increase in heavy traffic, and certainly the in-vehicle technologies, as I mentioned, the GPS systems have certainly added to distractions. Distracted driving is a major factor in more than 4,000 crashes daily. Distractions may come from inside or outside the vehicle. Taking your mind off the road is just as risky as taking your eyes off the road. We know that distracted drivers fail to recognize potential hazards in the road and react more slowly, reducing their margin of safety. And research suggests that distracted driving increases the risk of rear, end, and single vehicle crashes. Recognizing distracted driving. Certainly if a passenger were to scream at you because something you did or didn't do, or for whatever reason you rode through a red light or a stop sign, that would certainly be an indication that you're distracted. Slamming on your brakes because you didn't see the car in front of you stop, and certainly not remembering to drive from one place to another is a good indication that you've been somewhat distracted. Trying to avoid those, we know that safe driving practices require that you constantly search the roadway ahead of you for situations that could require quick attention. And certainly the faster you're driving, the more volume of traffic that's on the road requires you to scan even further ahead, and it certainly does require your full attention. Even the most routine activities are potentially distracting. Thinking about activities that drivers engage in while talking. Here at the top of the list we see talking to passengers, 96%. While we're not advocating that you not talk to your passengers, what we would ask the passenger in the front passenger seat is to be a heads-up passenger, and that involves looking at the road as you're traveling, not distracting the driver by looking at them, which naturally the driver would want to look at the passenger. So just be a heads-up passenger. Right behind that at 89% would be adjusting the vehicle or the climate or radio controls. 74% eating, using a cell phone, which here listed at 51% certainly to me seems to be higher. Texting should probably be here somewhere on this list, probably north of 50%, I would think. Tending to children, reading a map, grooming, preparing for work are all on the list. And it's not uncommon to see people doing multiple things on this list.